June 24, 1941, near Minsk, Byelorussia. The summer sun hung low over the plains, turning the dust into gold and the wreckage into shadow. For 3 days, the German Panzer divisions had advanced without pause, columns of tanks and half-tracks grinding eastward through burning villages and broken Soviet lines. Radios crackled, engines howled, and confidence filled the air like exhaust. Major Hans Freiherr von Leutwitz of the 7th Panzer Division stood in the turret of his Panzer Roman III goggles caked with grime, surveying the road ahead. He had fought in France and the Low Countries and believed he'd seen every tank the enemy could muster. The Red Army's machines, the general said, were slow, outdated relics. He would soon learn how wrong they all were. At 10:47 a.m., the forward scouts reported enemy armor near the tree line, a small group, maybe half a dozen vehicles. Easy work for German precision. Leutwitz gave the order, advance and engage. Range at 500 meters. The panzers moved into position, treads chewing the dry earth. Sunlight flashed off their 37 guns as the first rounds screamed toward the Soviet line. But instead of the expected plume of fire and metal, the shells ricocheted, sparks bursting off something unseen beyond the smoke. Then the shape appeared. A dark green mass rolled out of the trees, low, wide, and sloped like nothing they'd ever seen. The shell marks along its front armor glimmered like rain on glass. It moved fast, too fast for something that size. "What in God's name is that?" shouted the gunner. Leutwitz stared through his periscope. The vehicle's armor plates weren't vertical like German or French designs. They were angled deflecting shots effortlessly. Its tracks were broad, gliding over the mud with a grace their panzers could never manage. And on its turret sat a thick, stub-nosed cannon unlike anything he recognized. The tank fired. A thunderclap split the air. The shell struck the lead panzer III dead center. The explosion threw dirt and flames skyward. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved inside the wreck. "Back! Back!" Leutwitz shouted, but it was too late. The Soviet tanks, there were 4 of them now, fanned out and began firing with methodical precision. Their engines growled deep and heavy, powered not by gasoline, but by diesel which smoked darkly instead of flaming bright. German armor-piercing rounds bounced off harmlessly. One Panzer's crew tried to flank, only to find their lighter machine bogged down in a muddy ditch, while the Russians thundered straight across it without slowing. Through his binoculars, Leutwitz could see a red star painted on the turret, and below it, Cyrillic letters stenciled crudely onto the steel. T-34. He didn't know it yet, but that single marking would haunt every German tank officer for the rest of the war. The radio crackled. "Command, we can't penetrate. Their armor, our shells break apart. Hit the tracks," Leutwitz ordered. "Aim for the sides." Another gun fired. The shell struck the Soviet tank's suspension, blowing a shower of mud and metal. It lurched, but didn't stop. The T-34 kept coming, its gun pivoting like an animal's head. A blinding flash. The panzer next to Leutwitz vanished in flame. By noon, the skirmish was over. 3 German tanks burned along the roadside, their crews dazed or dead. The Soviets withdrew into the forest as silently as they had appeared. Only the deep ruts of their wide tracks remained, carved into the earth like wounds. That night, under a dim canvas tent, Leutwitz wrote his field report by lantern light. His hands still trembled. "We have encountered a new Russian tank, designation unknown. Front armor appears immune to 37 fire. Speed estimated at 50 kilometers per hour. Armament superior. Recommend immediate investigation." He paused, staring at the page. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery echoed like thunder over the plains. For the first time since the war began, he felt something colder than fear, doubt. Hundreds of miles east, in a factory in Kharkov sparks lit the night as workers welded the next batch of T-34s. Men in soot-covered coats and women with oil-stained hands labored beside roaring furnaces. There were no speeches, no anthems, only the rhythm of hammers and the hiss of molten metal. Each tank was a defiance cast in steel, born from desperation and design genius. The Germans thought they'd face peasants with pitchforks. Instead, they had met the future. Rain fell in thin, bitter sheets over the battlefield. The road to Moscow had turned to sludge, a graveyard of shattered wagons and burned trucks. The Germans were still advancing, but slower now, and with a kind of caution they hadn't known in France or Poland. The enemy's retreat no longer looked like panic. It looked like bait. Major Hans von Leutwitz's Panzer column crawled forward, engines sputtering through the mud. The smell of burned fuel hung over the fields. "Careful, Hans," warned his radio operator. "We're in tank country now." They both knew what that meant, T-34 country. Since Minsk, the stories had spread through every Panzer regiment like ghost tales told around a fire. Reports described Russian tanks that could outrun half-dracks, climb hills like tractors, and shrug off 37 shells as if made of stone. Some said the Soviets had only a handful. Others whispered thousands were already rolling west. Leutwitz didn't believe in ghosts, but he'd seen the wrecks, German shells embedded in armor that refused to break. On the other side of the forest line, a young Soviet lieutenant named Dmitry Mikhailovich crouched beside his tank in the rain. His uniform was soaked, his hands raw from weeks of fighting. His machine, the T-34/76 still smelled of factory paint and scorched diesel. It had been built only 3 months earlier in Kharkov and shipped straight to the front with its crew barely trained. They called her Ognenaya Zvezda Fire Star. He ran his glove over the slope of the turret. It was cold, smooth, and pitted with the scars of yesterday's battle. The tank looked crude compared to the precision of German panzers, but it was strong, fast, and simple. Every bolt, every hatch was made to endure dust, ice, and mud. Dmitri looked over to his driver, a teenage mechanic from Kiev. "Remember," he said, "don't stop, ever. She fights by moving." The boy nodded. "Comrade Lieutenant, I trust her more than I trust God." At noon, the storm broke, leaving a grey stillness that settled over the woods. Then came the rumble. Faint at first, distant engines. The Soviets waited. The sound grew louder until the ground began to tremble. Through his periscope, Dmitri saw the first German tanks appear on the open plain, sleek Panzer IIIs and IVs fanning out in disciplined formation. They gleamed neat and confident like predators at the start of a hunt. He flipped down the sight lens. "Range 700 meters," he muttered. "Gunner AP shell. Wait for my mark." Inside the cramped hull, the crew held their breath. The air was thick with oil and sweat. The diesel engine idled low, rumbling like a heart in a steel chest. "Fire!" The gun recoiled with a deafening crack. The shell streaked across the field and struck a Panzer square in the turret. The explosion tore the tank apart. Flames burst from its hatches. German formations scattered instantly. The Soviets fired again. And again. The T-34s emerged from the tree line, diesel engines bellowing, wide tracks crushing the soft earth. Their sloped armor turned incoming shells into glancing sparks. The next shell hit a T-34's side. It ricocheted, spun into the mud, and detonated harmlessly. Leutwitz slammed his fist on the turret rim. Impossible! The T-34s kept advancing, guns barking flame. Every shot landed heavy and true. The German line faltered. Smoke filled the air. communication broke down. Lutwitz's tank reversed frantically, slipping in the mud. Another German Panzer exploded beside him. Fall back, regroup at the ridge. As his conv retreated, he looked back through the periscope and saw something that would never leave him. A single T-34 cresting a hill, its turret wreathed in smoke, the red star gleaming like fire through the haze. The machine stopped, turret turning slowly, surveying the burning field. Then it moved on, unstoppable, indifferent to the chaos it had created. Hours later, when the firing finally died down, Lutwitz sat at a field table in the ruined village church, helmet off, face streaked with soot. Around him lay reports from every Panzer battalion in his regiment. Engagements lost asterisk, armor ineffective asterisk, asterisk unknown model, T-34 asterisk. A colonel slammed his fist on the table. This shouldn't be possible. How could peasants build such machines? Lutwitz stared at the map. It's not the peasants, he said quietly. It's their engineers. We underestimated them. He thought of the sloped armor, the power, the simplicity, the way the tank moved like a living thing. He remembered the flashes of red stars among the smoke. Tell Berlin, he said finally. We're not fighting a backward army anymore. We're fighting the future. That night, far behind Soviet lines, a locomotive thundered eastward, pulling flat cars loaded with half-finished T-34 hulls. In the factory towns of the Urals, welders worked under blackout curtains, sparks falling like snow. The workers sang softly over the roar of the furnaces. We build not for glory, but for survival. They didn't know that their creation had already become legend, an iron ghost haunting every German tank crew on the Eastern Front. The forests east of Orel were painted with the first frost of autumn. Birch trees gleamed pale under a low grey sky, their leaves trembling in the cold wind that swept across the battlefield. The roads had turned to rivers of mud. Trucks bogged down axle-deep, horses sank to their flanks. The German advance toward Moscow had slowed to a crawl. Major Asterisk Erhard Raus Asterisk, commanding officer of the 6th Panzer Division, leaned over the hood of his command car, binoculars pressed to his eyes. In the distance, the valley ahead burned, black smoke rising from destroyed supply wagons, their flames reflected in pools of rainwater. Somewhere beyond the haze, his forward units had made contact with Soviet armor, but something was wrong. The radio reports didn't sound like skirmishes. They sounded like asterisk panic. Command, we've hit heavy armor, not KV tanks, smaller, faster, they're everywhere. Our shells bounce right off. Repeat, no penetration. We've lost 3 panzers already. Rouse lowered his binoculars slowly. Around him, his staff waited in tense silence. Impossible, he muttered. At this rain. In this weather. He'd fought tanks before. British, French, even captured Polish models. But never anything that moved like this, that could fight on its own terms in the worst possible terrain. He climbed into his Panzer Command vehicle and ordered his driver forward. Take me to the front. I want to see these ghosts myself. An hour later, the battlefield was a nightmare of mud and smoke. German tanks sat crippled and burning, their once-proud grey armor streaked black with soot. The air stank of diesel, wet earth, and blood. From the edge of a shattered orchard, Rouse finally saw them. Asterisk T-34s, asterisk. Dozens of them, moving in loose formation through the swamp like sharks through shallow water. Their broad tracks churned effortlessly where German treads sank. Shells exploded against their sloped hulls and slid away like rain off glass. Each tank fired, the roar echoing like thunder between the hills. He watched one Soviet machine charge straight through a line of half-tracks, crushing them flat beneath its treads before pivoting its turret and blasting a Panzer IV at point-blank range. Another T-34 was hit on the side, the impact peeling a chunk of armor. But it kept going, flames licking its rear deck. "They're attacking without formation," said his adjutant, eyes wide. "They fight like wolves," Rouse nodded grimly. "Number like machines that can smell fear." He ordered artillery support. "Shell the forest edge. Anything that moves." The barrage began, howling, deafening, relentless. For minutes, the horizon disappeared in smoke and flame. When the guns finally fell silent, the Germans exhaled in exhausted relief. Then, out of the drifting haze, the sound came again, low, grinding, inevitable. The silhouettes emerged, black against the fire. T-34s still moving ***, still alive, steel ghosts rising through the mist. The men around Rouse stared in disbelief. One of them whispered, "Herr Major, how do you stop them?" Rouse's answer was quiet but certain. "You don't. You slow them down and pray the winter stops them first." Back in Berlin, inside the cold marble offices of the High Command, the first captured T-34 arrived by train. German engineers and generals gathered around it like priests before a relic. They walked its sloped armor, touched its broad tracks, studied its turret. General Heinz Guderian architect of the blitzkrieg, folded his arms. "Who designed this?" he asked. A staff officer replied, "Reports say it came from Kharkov and that they can build thousands." Guderian scowled. "Then the Russians aren't beaten, not by a long way." He pointed to the angled armor. "That," he said, tapping the steel, "is genius. Simple, efficient, deadly. We must copy it." The note he sent to the armaments ministry that evening was blunt. "We must immediately construct a vehicle to counter the T-34. Speed, sloped armor, and a high-velocity gun are essential. Every day we delay, it grows stronger." The Panther tank would be born from that panic, but not in time to change the tide. Meanwhile, far east in Chelyabinsk at a factory the Soviets nicknamed Tankograd, thousands of workers toiled under lantern light. Women welded armor plates, children loaded rivets, and soldiers fresh from the front hammered steel into form. Snow drifted through broken windows, melting in the heat of furnaces that never cooled. An engineer named Mikhail Koshkin whose original design sketches had birthed the T-34, was already dead, claimed by pneumonia after test driving prototypes through blizzards years before. But his machine lived and multiplied. Every 12 hours, a new tank rolled off the line, its red star freshly painted, its engine coughing black smoke into the freezing dawn. A Soviet foreman shouted over the roar of machines, "Every tank we build is a soldier that never tires." And far away on the front lines, those soldiers of steel kept moving, through mud, through fire, through the disbelief of their enemies. By the end of 1941, the Germans had learned to fear a single word whispered over their radios. Tanks ahead, T-34s. The unstoppable had become reality, and the legend had only begun. The air over the steppe shimmered with heat and gun smoke. As far as the eye could see, the earth was scored by trenches, barbed wire, and the black skeletons of burned-out vehicles. Thousands of tanks crouched in the fields like beasts waiting for the hunt to begin. The Battle of Kursk was about to decide the fate of the Eastern Front. At dawn, the horizon began to move. The German spearhead, Tigers, Panthers, and Panzers rolled forward in perfect lines, their engines growling like thunder. To the west, Soviet guns opened fire, the ground shaking beneath the bombardment. Dust clouds rose so high that sunlight turned to shadow. In a camouflaged position north of Prokhorovka, Lieutenant Dmitry Mikhailov climbed into his T-34/76 the same tank that had survived Minsk and Smolensk. Its green paint was now dulled by scars and soot. The red star on the turret faded from months of battle. Inside, The air stank of oil and sweat. His crew waited for his word. "Comrades," Dmitri said quietly, his voice steady over the whine of the diesel engine, "today we fight them on open ground. They think they can break us here. Let's prove them wrong." The radio hissed to life. The roar of engines filled the air as hundreds of T-34s surged across the plain. The sky trembled. German and Soviet armor collided in what would become the largest tank battle in human history. Across the line, Major Erhard Raus watched through his binoculars from the hatch of his Panzer command vehicle. The Soviet counterattack looked like a storm of steel sweeping over the horizon. Wave after wave of T-34s racing across the steppe at full throttle, guns flashing through the dust. "Mein Gott," whispered one of his officers. "There are hundreds." "No," Rouse corrected grimly. "Thousands." The German Tigers opened fire, their 88 guns roaring. The shells tore through the air, slamming into the lead Soviet tanks. Explosions blossomed like dark flowers. But still, the line didn't stop. Where one T-34 burned, two more appeared behind it, pushing forward, indifferent to death. Through the haze, the battlefield became a blur of movement. Tigers firing point blank, T-34s weaving through wrecks, smoke so thick it swallowed the horizon. The ground shook under the weight of machines and men alike. Inside Ognenaya Zvezda Dimitri's crew fought by instinct. "Left! Left!" the gunner shouted. The driver swung the tank just in time to avoid a shell that screamed past the turret and burst behind them. The concussion rattled every bolt in the hull. Dmitri lined up a Tiger in his sights, waited half a heartbeat, then fired. The round struck the German tank's track, blowing it apart in a shower of sparks. The Tiger stopped, wounded, smoke pouring from its engine. Dimitri's loader slammed in another shell, hands bleeding from shrapnel. "Loaded! Fire!" the gun roared again. The Tiger's turret burst open in a flash of flame. "Good hit!" the gunner yelled, but there was no time to celebrate. Another shell struck their own hull, denting the armor and throwing them all against the walls. The tank lurched, then steadied. The driver wiped blood from his forehead. "Still running," he shouted. They drove on through fire, through wreckage, through hell itself. By midday, the battlefield was a cauldron. The German advance stalled under the sheer weight of Soviet armor. Their new Panthers broke down in the heat. Fuel convoys burned. Commanders shouted into radios that no longer worked. At 1300 hours, the Red Air Force appeared, dark shapes cutting through the smoke. Bombs fell on German lines, scattering infantry and igniting supply trucks. Rouse slammed his fist on the turret rim. "Pull back to secondary position. We can't hold." As his Panzer reversed, he caught a glimpse of something that chilled him. A column of T-34 cresting a ridge sunlight glinting off their sloped armor, moving in perfect synchronization like the gears of a colossal machine. He'd seen them before years ago, when they were a mystery. Now he understood what they were, a asterisk system, not a weapon, a symbol of Soviet will forged in steel. "This war," he said to his adjutant, "belongs to them now." By evening, the field was quiet except for the crackle of fire and the distant rumble of engines still moving east to west. Kursk had devoured men and machines alike. But when the smoke cleared, the Red Army still stood. In Moscow, word of victory spread like wildfire. In factories across the Urals, welders cheered and wiped tears from their soot-streaked faces. For the first time since 1941, the Soviet people believed the impossible, that they could win. Months later, when German prisoners marched through the snow toward captivity, many turned to look back at the columns of Soviet armor passing them on the road. The T-34s clattered forward, mud frozen on their sides. white stars painted over the old red ones. One officer whispered to another, his voice hollow. "It's not a tank, it's a nation on tracks." The machine that wasn't supposed to exist had outlived its creators, outlasted its enemies, and rewritten the meaning of industrial war. In the ruins of Europe, generals would argue for decades about who built the best tank. But every soldier who saw one on the Eastern Front already knew the answer. The T-34 was not perfect. It was not elegant. It was inevitable.